For years, the public watched Prince Harry sacrifice everything for Meghan Markle's love. He abandoned his royal duties, distanced himself from his family, and turned his back on centuries of tradition, all to protect the woman he adored. But now something has shifted. Inside their inner circle, there's a devastating truth emerging, one caused not by outside pressure but by Harry's own awakening. Because in a revelation that stunned even those closest to the couple, Harry recently uncovered something that completely blindsided Meghan and revealed fractures in their bond that can no longer be concealed. Harry admits it all began with one conversation, one moment, one slip of honesty that exposed the entire facade they built their relationship on. And once you grasp what that moment truly revealed, the whole narrative transforms. This isn't just a marriage with problems. This is a marriage built on quicksand, and the ground has finally started to give way. Now let's trace back to the moment everything quietly began to fracture. It was February 2018, a month that seemed uneventful to the public but carried a strange weight behind palace doors. Tucked inside the royal communication system was an email from Prince Harry. Not casual, not emotional, but an official message that would later resurface in court. To most who glanced at it, the note looked routine, protective, nothing worth a second thought. But hidden between the lines was a single sentence that hit like a warning bell. Harry wrote, "I can't begin to describe what it will mean for the institution if this isn't taken care of before the baby arrives and before the wedding." At first it sounded responsible, almost noble, but the few people who examined the message closely felt something tighten in their chest, because the timeline made absolutely no sense. In February 2018, there was no pregnancy announcement, no hints, no whispers, nothing. So why was Harry referencing a baby that no one, not staff, not family, not the public, knew anything about? There were only two ways to interpret it. Either Harry was speaking about a future child he hoped for, or he already believed one was on the way. And judging by the tension in that email, the urgency, the pressure, the edge of panic, it didn't sound like wishful thinking. It sounded like a man trying to stabilize a situation before anyone realized something was wrong. That single line became the spark, the tiny slip that exposed a bigger truth, one Harry never intended to reveal. Because if Meghan had told him she was expecting at that time, suddenly every rushed decision that followed makes sense. As that email circulated through palace inboxes, confusion spread in quiet waves. Meghan had allegedly told Harry she was pregnant, and Harry, emotional, fiercely loyal, already protective, believed her without question. And why wouldn't he? He adored her. But behind the scenes, nothing added up. There were no medical checks, no confirmations, no scheduled appointments. The only constant was Harry repeating one line with rising urgency. "It has to be settled before the baby arrives." That phrase echoed through late-night conversations, emergency meetings, and whispered exchanges. It felt as though the entire palace had been forced onto a countdown they never agreed to follow. Meanwhile, in the middle of all the chaos, Harry began to crack under the pressure. He wasn't behaving like the composed royal the world expected. He was moving like a man convinced time was suffocating him. To him, everything seemed ready to collapse if the truth surfaced too soon. Every choice felt urgent. Every discussion carried tension. Every delay sent him into another spiral. And underneath all of it, one silent question kept growing heavier. If Meghan truly was expecting, why couldn't anyone else verify it? But Harry didn't stop to question anything. He held on to every word she told him. That loyalty, that blind trust was about to reshape his entire future. What shocked the palace most wasn't the rumor, it was the speed. Harry and Meghan had barely known each other a year when he began pushing for the wedding to happen immediately. Not next year, not in a few months, right away. Royal marriages normally move at a slow, deliberate pace, endless approvals, background checks, tradition guiding every step. But Harry shoved everything into a frantic sprint, compressing a years-long process into half a year. Staff were bewildered. Advisors whispered behind closed doors. Even the Queen, steady and unshakable, asked for explanations more than once. And yet the same pressure point kept surfacing. It all had to happen before the baby arrived. That single idea became the fuel behind every rushed decision, the reason rules were bent, schedules warped, and the palace scrambled non-stop. Meghan stayed calm through it all, polished and glowing. Harry, meanwhile, looked strained, emotional, restless, almost frantic. Beyond the staged photographs and cheerful public appearances, another reality was unfolding. A prince rushing toward a marriage he felt trapped into completing. A wedding driven not by love or royal protocol, but by panic, by desperation on a secret nobody could verify, but Harry absolutely trusted. And this frantic rush became the root of everything that would crumble later. Because if the pregnancy that forced Harry to the altar was a lie, then the fairy tale he thought he was saving might have been fake too. By March 2018, something odd shifted inside the palace. The gossip died down. The panic that had thrown every royal timeline into madness suddenly disappeared. Meetings that were once chaotic became calm again. Staff who had been sprinting at full speed just weeks before now stood puzzled, wondering why the baby crisis they'd been told to handle was suddenly never brought up again. It was like the whole emergency had vanished into thin air. According to hushed conversations inside royal circles, Meghan had told Harry she'd miscarried, a private tragedy the world never knew about. But others spotted that the timing was all wrong, not even close. If Meghan really had been pregnant in late 2017, the baby should have been due around mid-2018. Yet no clues, no official word, no visible changes ever showed up at the wedding in May. Then something even stranger happened. Harry didn't behave like someone mourning a devastating loss. He behaved like someone who felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The stress he'd dumped on everyone around him seemed to vanish, but the truth behind it stayed buried in mystery. Palace workers noticed, the Queen noticed, and those who had witnessed the chaos firsthand began quietly wondering the same thing. Had there ever been a pregnancy to begin with? Because when Archie was born in May 2019, almost 2 years after the supposed first pregnancy, the timeline made zero sense. Not even remotely. There was absolutely no way the 2017 pregnancy story and Archie's birth were related. This was when the palace understood something important. The panic that had once driven Harry might not have been based on facts, but on what he believed. And belief, especially when mixed with love and fear, can be the most powerful weapon of all. If the vanishing pregnancy raised red flags, Meghan's actions raised even bigger ones. People inside the palace began seeing a clear pattern, almost like a playbook, in how she handled different moments. She had 3 go-to approaches for any situation, like putting on different faces depending on what she needed most. Face 1, the victim. When she wanted pity, she knew exactly how to make her voice tremble, make her eyes fill with tears, and paint herself as broken, misunderstood, or attacked. This triggered Harry's protective side immediately. She understood that he carried deep emotional scars, especially from losing his mother. Any hint of someone being hurt drew him in completely. Face 2, the devoted partner. When she needed loyalty, she shifted into warmth and unity. She made it seem like she and Harry were standing together against everyone else. Every decision became about us. Every conflict with the palace became a battle of them against us. And Harry, already feeling isolated from the institution, naturally fell in line with her direction. Face 3, the celebrity. When she craved influence, she unleashed her magnetism. The self-assurance, the appeal, the commanding presence. The way she dominated cameras and captured attention. This wasn't merely confidence, it was calculated. It allowed her to claim territory within the royal story that no outsider had ever successfully claimed before. And Harry, he transformed depending on which persona she displayed. When she wept, he shielded her. When she united with him, he followed blindly. When she sparkled, he faded into the background. Those around him saw the transformation. A prince who had once seemed steady was now responding emotionally to every change in Meghan's mood. She had discovered the key that controlled his decisions, and she wielded it with surgical precision. Every time palace staff raised concerns, every time tradition resisted, every time anyone showed doubt, Meghan's timing was flawless. Emotion became her weapon, love became her tool, and Harry became the warrior fighting battles he couldn't fully comprehend. The prison wasn't built of bars or locks. It was constructed from feelings, intense, overwhelming emotions that surrounded him silently until he couldn't distinguish between genuine love and manipulation. By the time May 2018 came around, the momentum couldn't be halted. Whether the early pregnancy claim had disappeared or not, the ceremony was moving forward. The Queen had given her blessing. The venue was secured. The worldwide media was positioned. But behind the palace doors, nobody had forgotten what brought them to this point. They recalled Harry's desperation. They recalled the frantic pace. They recalled the impossible demands that forced everyone's hand. They also recalled something else. The baby that had once driven every choice was no longer part of any discussion. And when Meghan glided down the aisle, perfect, composed, glowing, many within the royal family felt an unsettling coldness instead of celebration because they understood something Harry didn't. He wasn't stepping into a love story. He was entering a marriage built on panic, not passion. While the world witnessed elegance, tradition, royal splendor, and joyful celebrations, those behind palace doors saw a completely different reality. A prince who had been cornered. A timeline that never added up, a crisis that mysteriously vanished once the wedding was locked in. To them, this wasn't love, it was manipulation, a ceremony driven by pressure, a wedding that became inevitable once the emotional warfare had begun. And the most crushing part, Harry thought he had saved the day. He believed he had rescued his beloved. He was certain he had done the honorable thing. He had no clue, not yet, that the moment he said "I do," all the urgency evaporated because it had served its purpose. The web had been woven perfectly, and the consequences of that one frantic moment would shadow him for life. When Harry and Meghan escaped the palace, everyone thought they were chasing their dreams. California freedom, endless sunshine, a mansion worth more than entire royal estates. It looked like paradise, the perfect place to build something real. Harry even told close friends he finally felt alive again. But freedom without direction can slowly become its own prison. In Montecito, nothing felt familiar anymore. The royal restrictions were gone, but so were the schedules, the duties, and the solid foundation Harry had always known. He never realized how much those invisible structures had anchored him until they completely disappeared. At first, California seemed like the answer. New deals, exciting projects, constant media buzz. But little by little, something inside Harry began to die. People in their inner circle described him as distant, moody, lost, minus like a man who ran toward the horizon only to find there was nothing waiting for him there. Meghan came alive in their new world. Spotlight, interviews, boardroom meetings, brand building. She absolutely glowed under all the attention. Harry, though, was drowning. He wasn't a prince anymore. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't the hero-volutionary changing everything. He felt like a prop, a side character in what was supposed to be his own story. And inside that massive, fortress-like Montecito mansion, walls higher than medieval castles, the emptiness grew louder than any freedom they'd gained. It all comes back to those few words, that email, that split second Harry never imagined would control his entire future, before the baby's arrival and the wedding. It wasn't just a note, it wasn't casual planning. It was the blueprint, one that revealed everything long before Harry could see what was happening to him. Hidden in that message from years ago was his whole story. The desperation, the fear, the control, the reason he feels suffocated, the reason he walked away from everything, the reason he's now a man without a kingdom, without a purpose, without the happiness he thought love would finally bring him. And here's the most heartbreaking truth. Harry wasn't just fooled by deception. He was fooled by his own desperate hope, the hope that love could heal all his wounds, the hope that Meghan would be the one person who chose him just for being him. But sometimes the real tragedy isn't being deceived by someone else. It's realizing you've been lying to yourself all along. Now the cameras keep rolling, Meghan keeps shining, the brand stays perfect and polished, but Harry walks next to her in silence. No longer a prince with his own destiny, but a man stuck replaying the moment that destroyed everything. That email wasn't just evidence of what happened, it was the truth he couldn't face then and can't run from now. Marriage problems don't start with big scandals. They start with a single sentence, and Harry's sentence has been haunting him ever since. The fairy tale is dead, the mask is slipping, and the world is waiting to see what happens when Harry finally stops living the lie. But the silence inside that Montecito mansion didn't just weigh on Harry, it began to expose everything he'd been trying to outrun. Without the palace routines to distract him, without the royal duties to anchor him, the thoughts he had buried for years finally surfaced. And what shocked him most wasn't Meghan's ambition or the shift in their roles. It was the growing realization that something about his life no longer made sense. The choices he once believed were noble now felt rushed. The freedom he had chased began to feel like exile, and in that stillness, the biggest truth he had avoided began whispering louder than ever. People close to the couple say Harry started asking questions he never dared ask before. Questions about timelines, motives, stories that didn't align. Moments he once brushed aside now replayed in his mind with painful clarity, and with each memory came a new sting. He realized he had ignored signs not because he didn't see them, but because he couldn't bear what they meant. Meanwhile, Meghan's growing influence in Hollywood only deepened the divide. She flourished in rooms filled with power brokers, executives, producers eager to attach themselves to her brand. Harry, on the other hand, found himself fading into the background, a supporting figure in a world that didn't feel like it belonged to him. He was supposed to be reinventing himself. Instead, he felt like he'd traded one cage for another. Only this one was gilded, sun-soaked, and impossible to escape. Rumors inside entertainment circles suggest Harry privately admitted he felt pushed into a life he never asked for. He missed the structure, the purpose, even the discipline he once resented. And that longing only intensified when memories of his mother resurfaced. Diana had always warned him about people who loved the spotlight more than the person beside them. Those words, once comforting, now cut him deeply. Because for the first time he wondered if he'd repeated the very cycle he swore he'd never relive. To those watching from the sidelines, the shift in Harry was unmistakable. He wasn't the carefree prince who ran off to California. He wasn't the bold rebel defying royal tradition. He was a man waking up from a dream that had turned into a trap. And the more he awakened, the harder it became to ignore how many parts of his life were built on promises that kept changing shape. What no one outside their circle realized was that Harry's unraveling in California wasn't just about losing structure, it was about losing himself. As the months passed, the silence inside that massive Montecito estate became a mirror he couldn't look away from. Without royal duties, without the weight of the crown, without the purpose he once took for granted, he began confronting questions he had buried for years, and every answer pushed him further into a place Meghan couldn't control: self-reflection. Rumors from those close to the couple say this was when Harry started revisiting old memories, reopening doors he had locked tight since childhood. But the moment that changed everything was when he stumbled across something he hadn't expected: a set of old letters and recordings from Princess Diana that he hadn't listened to in years. Messages filled with warnings about people who might try to manipulate him, about losing his identity to the wrong influences, about mistaking attention for affection. Diana had lived through a world of illusions, and her words suddenly hit Harry with terrifying clarity. For the first time, he began to question the timeline, the decisions, the panic, the email, the forced urgency. And once doubt seeped in, everything he thought he understood about Meghan, her timing, her emotional swings, her calculated charm, took on a different shape. According to insiders, this was the moment Harry stopped defending her automatically. He stopped absorbing every explanation without hesitation. He stopped letting her set the pace. And Meghan noticed instantly. The tension between them grew in ways no one could hide. Harry withdrew emotionally. Meghan pushed harder. He wanted answers, she wanted control. He wanted honesty, she wanted loyalty. Their once united front began to fracture, and what had started as a private shift soon became an undeniable divide. But the real breaking point came when Harry confronted her about the early pregnancy, the one detail he had never questioned until Diana's words echoed back into his life. Meghan reportedly reacted with frustration, anger, and disbelief that Harry would even ask. Instead of reassurance, she gave defensiveness. Instead of clarity, she gave confusion. And for the first time, Harry didn't back down. This was the moment the illusion began to shatter, because when a man who built his entire world around someone finally stops accepting the story he's been told, everything that story is built on starts to collapse. In the end, everything circles back to the one thing Harry spent years trying to outrun: the truth. Not the palace narrative, not Meghan's narrative, not the media's narrative, but his own. For so long, he believed love would fill the gaps left by a childhood lived under flashing cameras and whispered secrets. He believed loyalty would make the wounds disappear. He believed that choosing Meghan meant choosing peace. But peace never came. And now, standing years away from the boy who lost his mother and the prince who walked away from his kingdom, he's forced to confront what everyone else saw long before he could. He didn't escape a cage. He walked into a new one. The world once envied the freedom he fought for: the mansion, the sunshine, the Hollywood connections, the carefully crafted brand. But none of that could hide the truth that kept growing louder in Montecito's silence. Harry had traded one kind of control for another. He had replaced structure with chaos, duty with confusion, purpose with dependency, and somewhere along the way he lost himself. Now the questions he avoided for years are following him everywhere. Why was the timeline of their relationship built on fear instead of trust? Why did every major decision happen under pressure, under urgency, under emotional weight? Why did he give up everything only to end up with nothing he ever truly wanted? And most haunting of all, if the story wasn't real from the beginning, what exactly was he fighting for? The public sees the polished smiles and synchronized appearances, but insiders describe a different picture. A man who moves through his new life like he's trying to remember who he was before it all slipped away. Meghan continues building the empire she always wanted. Harry keeps trying to convince himself it's the life he wanted too. But the cracks are too deep now, the patterns too obvious, the past too loud to ignore. Because the truth about cracks is simple: they don't disappear. They grow quietly, steadily, until the whole foundation gives way. And Harry is finally standing at the edge of that breaking point, forced to choose between the narrative he's been protecting and the reality he's been running from. The world is watching, waiting, analyzing every expression, every distance between them at events, every change in tone. Something is shifting, and everyone can feel it. Whatever happens next won't be subtle, it won't be quiet, and it won't be hidden behind palace walls or Montecito gates. For the first time in years, Harry is standing at a crossroads, one path leading back to himself, the other disappearing into the life he built out of panic and hope. And when he finally decides which truth he's willing to face, the story of Harry and Meghan will change forever. Not because of rumors or headlines, but because the man at the center of it has finally stopped pretending. The illusion is cracking, the mask is slipping, and the world is waiting for the moment everything finally falls apart.